Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Hey, welcome back, everybody. I have said this before. We've talked about this, and it's something that many of us don't realize has impacted our lives. I'm talking about, it's the T word, trauma. We've all endured some type of traumas in our life. I call them the little T traumas. You got the big T traumas. It could be something you experienced as a child. You heard things. You saw somebody said something in the other room, and you internalize it as, oh, that was for me. And now you hold on to that. And of course, you can have those big traumas like a car accident and such. Interestingly, there are many different modalities that can help with all of that. And she offers that from craniosacral therapy to different types of massage. We're going to learn a lot today and run deep here on the trauma thing. And that's just the starting point. KellyAnne Riden joins us here on the program. How are you doing today?
Yes, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Very well, very well. Good to be back. I know we talked a while ago and
Sure.
About some of the therapies that you're offering. And then that got us here to today. Before we get into different types of traumas, tell us about your practice, some of the things that you do offer.
Yeah, so we do offer our basic, what we call like relaxation massage. Sometimes it's referred to as Swedish massage. So that's just, basic maintenance, just light work, some deep, but not as heavy as deep tissue. We do offer deep tissue neuromuscular. That's a bit of more deep. Sometimes it's cross fiber. So instead of working with the strings of the fibers of the muscles longitudinally, you're going to be working cross fiber this way. So that's a little bit more of a deeper, rougher technique for a little bit more like scar tissue. You have like buildup from like arthritis, pains, those types of things. And if you have impact trauma, sometimes the muscle just has a hypertonicity, which basically it's kind of like swelling, but it's the way the body encases itself to kind of protect itself from further injury. Kind of is like memory foam. It just kind of remembers the impact trauma, so it tries to build up almost like a callus inside the body. So deep tissue neuromuscular helps with that. We also offer MET work. I hate the acronym, but it stands for muscle energy technique. It is not energy work at all. So no hoo-hoo, frou-frou stuff, no dowsers, no Reiki, none of that. Basically, muscle energy technique is like physical therapy. So you're using resisting techniques that is fatiguing the muscle, forcing it to relax and lengthen. And then you're also using the deep tissue work to keep it relax and lengthen for longer periods of time, but you're stretching the specific isolated muscle that's giving you the problem, and then you're going over it with the deep tissue work. And then last but not least, we do offer the craniosacral therapy, which that can be a Pandora box in itself. That can go so many different ways and branches, and I think we're going to get a little bit more into that as we talk on.
Yeah, so a lot of the therapies that you mentioned, many of us have heard of, but I'm intrigued to find out how they can help support somebody who has dealt with a trauma. And maybe we should look at those different types of traumas, maybe illustrate how something that you may have dealt with as a kid and has maybe held you back in life now, how what you can offer can help with that. And then certainly, the big traumas, like a car accident, tissue damage and things like that. Where do you want to begin?
Yeah, so I just want to say we do offer a lot of our services in tandem with a lot of counseling agencies. So if you're working with a therapist and you kind of hit a wall, a lot of those cases we get referred in. Therapists have kind of gone through all their repertoire, and their client's still not progressing. So a lot of times that's when we start looking at trauma that's stored in the body. So that could be a neurological trauma. And that can be physical, mental, emotional, sometimes combination of all the above. We've actually had a few cases of infant trauma. Some of them are very heart-wrenching. We do have, unfortunately, sexual trauma cases from infants. it's really sad. Those kids are going through the system. And unfortunately, they're at an age where they don't even understand their own feelings, let alone being able to verbalize them. All they can understand is like, this doesn't feel good. So that's when you get the acting out. That's when you get a lot of the just the cognitive things that are just not quite their mile markers where they're supposed to be. So a lot of times we'll go through and we can divulge the trauma through the nerve lines there. So a neurological trauma can be either straight out of the womb, like something went wrong with the birthing process. Sometimes the way they pull the infants out can be like whiplash to a child. And I think back in the day, they used to use like the forceps. I think I don't think they use those anymore. I might be mistaken on that, but I'm pretty certain they've moved on from that because it's caused so many structural injuries to the cranium of the infant, and can later on in life actually progress into like behavioral problems because there's pressure on the brain in specific areas that can cause them to have speech impediments or not develop their speech at all, or have ADHD or any type of like behavioral disorder, because you're putting pressure on those points in the brain and they're not able to grow, and they're not able to like actually decompress that in a way where their body can function properly. So that would be also like an impact injury because of the compression there. That would also, let go long enough, can turn into a neurological one because there's like neurological things within that compacted compression that would be a trickle-down effect from that. And then another form of trauma is an impact trauma. I think I spoke a little bit about that with infant stuff, but also car accidents or concussions. Those can be huge impact issues that can cause a lot of compressions in the platelets, in the cranium, that can lead to, again, a lot of issues down the road in life when things are left in compression. Things aren't moving properly, blood isn't circulating properly, the nutrition from the nervous system isn't circulating to those areas that actually need healing the most. And then a lot of times with those impact traumas, the emotional trauma kind of is an element that's all the way through any type of like trauma, if you want to call it capital T trauma, little t trauma, meaning like significant impact trauma. A lot of people see that as like a huge trauma because we think impact trauma is more like hospitals and ERs and just like the really severe types of trauma where you think blood spewing out everywhere. Like those are huge traumas to the body, yes. But we can have emotional traumas too, and they don't necessarily have to be from something traumatic like you've watched your parents being murdered in front of you, or if you're from a third world country, you're watching your whole village get, burned and pillaged and people coming at you with machetes. Those are huge traumas, yes. But a lot of times with impact injuries, that can create an emotional trauma on top of it. For example, we did have a case come through of a young gal. She was a single mom, and she had a terrible head injury. Impact injury, she stood up too fast in an attic. I don't know if something startled her, but she just stood up. She actually indented her skull, so you can feel her skull, and there's a dent. And she actually hit twice. So when she hit once, she passed out, went down, hit again. After that, she suffered severely from migraines and vertigo. Certain smells would just cause her just vision to spin. She couldn't sit down. She couldn't lie down. She couldn't sit up. She couldn't eat. She couldn't keep anything down.
Wow.
And of course, that turned into a very severe emotional trauma because if you don't feel good, you can't work. And then when you're the sole provider, you can't provide. And then you have your kids, and then you have your house, and then losing your house possibly, or if she was renting a place.
How old, can I ask, just to reaffirm, how old was she when she hit her head?
Yeah, I believe she was in her late 30s. Amazing. Early 40s. So she had a couple of young kiddos, I believe around the age like 7, 8, 9, around there. So like not infant age, but like significant enough where like the kids still had needs. and couldn't do as much for themselves. So just thinking about daily tasks of like laundry and homework and just getting kids on and off the bus, or if she had to drive them there, like those were simple tasks that just couldn't be done with her impact trauma of an injury. So then it causes an emotional element of trauma too. So that can break down your self-esteem and just kind of honestly snowball and make things much worse. Because if you're already in pain and then you add the emotional just distraughtness to it, that can kind of amp systems as well, just because neurologically our bodies are not made with that capacity.
Well, I want to go to the psychological traumas that somebody might have experienced as a child. Let's say, sure. Bullied on the playground, or maybe your parents got divorced, something like that took place. And now it's in your mind, it's in your subconscious, and then it's holding you back from moving forward in the future in many different areas. Call it a limiting belief. Now, I've heard and have even had, different modalities for things like that. And we all have them from being a child. There's something. We all got something going on. Reiki can support that, cleansing your energy. Woo-woo alert. I get it. So there's that. Hypnotherapy. There's another modality that can help you realize, what happened and what's going on. With what you offer, KellyAnne, how does that work?
Yeah, so through the craniosacral therapy, there's two dynamics of that. There's the biomechanic side, which is me going in and physically decompressing the platelets inside the skull. Let me go get my skull to give you a better example.
That'd be great.
Okay, so this is our friend here.
Mm-hmm.
So inside our buddy here, we have different platelets inside the skull. So on top, you can see that together there. So the blue here is the frontal. So if you have a head injury, say like a little kid where you smack the cement, you're running around, you just face plant. That impact, as we know with science, what stays in motion continues in motion. It doesn't just stop on impact. Same with if you're driving in a car and your hands are on the steering wheel, impact head on, the pain doesn't stay in your wrists. It ends up in your shoulders and then up through the neck or down the spine because it stays in motion. So when we start looking at like childhood trauma, so like something like a little kid falling and hurting themselves, this membrane inside the cranium fits right inside there. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but this little membrane right here, this little guy, see that I'm waving it? So that guy's really important. So that actually fits in the bottom of your occipital platelet here. So right in that foramen right there. So this platelet goes on the bottom of the skull. See it right there? That's this guy right there. So the problem is when this shifts, the foramen right here, where your spine goes through, if this shifts any which way, your spine has to follow suit. So if you have an impact injury inside the cranium that causes this buddy right here to tilt any which way, it's going to have an impact on your occipital platelet because of this little membrane right here. So if this turns, that's what's going to turn this. So your body's naturally going to want to counterbalance itself. So what goes out in the back of the cranium here, even just a little bit, is going to affect a lot of inner stuff in here. Especially this bone right here, the pink one. Now that one looks like this. It's the butterfly-shaped bone. So this intercranially, believe it or not, connects to your occipital platelet, kind of like that right there, intercranially. Now, if you look at where this bone hits, it hits almost every platelet. Actually, not almost. It does. It hits all the platelets. So if we look interaurally, you can see the greater wings right there underneath. You can see in front of the face, there's points here and here, and then inner orbitals there. On the side, you're going to see it right here. So actually, it correlates with all the platelets inside your skull. So again, back to this kid right here. This is the intercranial membranes. You have this one here, the greater fin, and then you have the lesser ones here. So when this tilts from any type of impact injury, or even like small impact. So think about if you're studying in school and this is your stance every day. You're pressing on the zygomatic bones, which is right here. Guess what's right behind it? In the inner orbitals, right there and right there. So if you're compressing here, this whole bit right here is going to be compressing on your sphenoid bone right here. So all your sensories run through here. Your taste, your sight, your smell, your balance, all the nerve lines. I don't know if you can see all the little holes in here. That's where all your nerve lines run through, and including your sinuses too. So a lot of times intracranially also, when we become of the age where we have braces and we clamp things down in the mouth, or we have retainers on top of the roof of the mouth and we're locking things into place and shifting it where we want it for social and society standards, straight teeth, you have a better appearance and highly likely to do better in your career. So once you start shifting these points right here can tip. Well, if this shifts and this is connected to your occiput, it's also going to shift. So even the slightest bit is going to have an impact. So especially with a concussion, when it's a very blunt force trauma, it can affect neurologically anything that nerve-wise runs through here. Again, your taste, your sight, your smell, your balance. So that can cause migraines. That can cause vertigo. Wow. That can cause an emotional trauma, which stems from a physical trauma because you no longer can do the things you used to, which can be very frustrating, which can be very debilitating, which can cause, the loss of career. I mean, in severe situations.
Sure.
And then a self-esteem issue as well, just not being good enough. You can't get through it.
I got to tell you, KellyAnne, I had no idea. Well, first of all, that model and you say so much. I had no idea how delicate our heads are, our skulls are. Yeah. Okay. So my limited understanding is we have a skull. The brain is inside. The brain is somewhat protected by the skull. And yes, you can have injuries. Had no idea of what you were just illustrating, how there's so many intricate pieces, really not hardly any protection that's going on there, and how things with just a small blow to the head can set things off and change your life. Oh my God. Like mind-blowing today.
Well, your head is protected. Unfortunately, the way the medical industry looks at a lot of their cadavers. Now, I've worked on what I'd call fresh cadavers. I know that seems a bit disgusting, but basically it means that they're just not embalmed. Now, embalmed cadavers, you can learn things, yes, but you can't necessarily see the stretchiness and the plyness of the intracranial tissues when it's embalmed. It looks like it doesn't move. It looks like it's a bone. So I don't know if you can see these sutures here.
Yeah.
See how they kind of interlock?
Yes.
Well, in the medical industry, they teach that when you are born, sometimes they're not together, but they grow together and then they fuse. That is actually incorrect. They don't fuse. The natural rhythm of the cerebrospinal fluid throughout the entire body actually has an expansion of 3 to 5 seconds and a flexion of 3 to 5 seconds. So these bones are actually supposed to move. They're supposed to open up a little bit and then close a little bit. Now, the reason we know this is because if you actually look right here, so this is the occiput on the bottom of the skull. But if you actually take a look, I don't know if we can see right here, see how this is a lot shorter. I don't know how we can do this here. All right, so the outer edge is longer than the inner. So this juts out more than the inner. And the reason that is it's a bump guard. So if it were to go into expansion, it can freely move into expansion. If it impacts, it can only go so far. But when you have an impact injury, it's going to go further. So to have it not collapse into on itself, we have to have these bump guards on the inner side that prevent things from going further than they should, because that helps the brain not get impacted on. But of course, with certain types of blunt force trauma, sometimes this isn't enough. So that's when you see people that have actual, like, head injuries where it's caved in.
And I want to share with you, just because you're at that point.
Yes.
When my son, he's 18 now, when he was just like 9 months old, he was diagnosed with sagittal stenosis, where the skull fuses together. At least that's the way it was described.
Yeah.
Way too soon, doesn't allow for the brain to grow. So his head was actually growing this way, like kind of out like a football.
Surface, yeah.
And he had to have surgery where they literally cut your skull, fused it together with wire. At least that's how they did it then. Then this cosmetic surgery, because they have to cut like from ear to ear. He's fantastic. He's an Eagle Scout. He's in college.
Yeah.
He was up and smiling the next day. Like a few hours later, it all worked out well. But to your point of how the skull, you said, it is somewhat permeable. His apparently wasn't, and a lot of kids nowadays, I don't even think they do surgery. I think they put a helmet on them for a period of time.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the way we work, we try to avoid that because, like you said, if it's fused together, it's not going to grow properly. So if you're sticking something on there and shaping it the way you want it, it's not going to grow the way you need it. I highly advise not to do that to your kid if they're recommending it. We always say bring them in here. What we do is we actually go through and decompress each one of these platelets. Because the brain is, or the skull is supposed to function with some flexion and extension in that. That's just the normal way that your body grows. And a lot of times with specifically children that are C-sectioned, they don't get that initial compression that their body actually naturally has to decompress from. Because when you're in the womb, when you're an infant and you're developing, if there's something you cannot handle because systematically you haven't grown enough yet to be able to handle it, you kick it out to the mother's system to be able to take care of it because she's fully grown. But when you're a child and you're developing in there, when you actually come out through the birthing canal, that is the skull's first time where it's actually compressed, and that's what ignites the growing process. That initial compression, and then they actually naturally have to decompress it. Now, when you cut open the room, reach in, pull out the child, they don't get that initial compression.
Wow.
So a lot of times their body doesn't know how to handle even a small donk on the head because now, it's compressed. So like you have a platelet here that say they knock their noodle, their little clumsy kid knocked their noodle on the side of the coffee table. Nothing drastic or detrimental to the point where, you got to rush them to the hospital. They'll get a bruise and they'll cry. But that actually can stay compressed. So then as they grow, it's going to expand out here. It's going to expand up here.
Wow.
Might expand down here. But this side won't. You have to be able to and decompress that so it actually works congruently together in the expansion and flexion process for it to grow properly. So left long enough, that can develop into like personality disorders, ADHD, speech impediment, or sometimes they just don't meet their mile markers. Now, it doesn't mean they can't grow out of it and the body can eventually decompress. There are cases where, the body will naturally try to take care of itself, but there are cases where the body it can't. It's incapable of doing it. Either the impact was too much and it can't decompress from it. Things get locked, things get chipped, things get not just compressed, but like compressed and like turned. So then it's locked in a certain way that it just naturally cannot take care of itself. But then everything else starts compensating. So this membrane starts bending, which means this down here starts shifting, which means this down here, the occipital platelet, has to shift, which means intercranially, this guy is going to have what they call sphenobaseal lesions, which basically means this thing gets caught different ways. And when it does, guess where all your nerve stuff goes through? This guy.
Wow.
So even if it's tilted just a little bit, you might have, like when little kids say, "Oh, mom, this side works, but this side doesn't," they get a stuffy nose, but, they're not sick. They don't have sinus drainage, but they have like a deviated septum. And that is so closely related to that bone right there. Like it's like right up in there. So a lot of times we do have to go in intraorally sometimes and actually work on that through the top part of the mouth and actually pull the maxilla out to give this space to actually turn the way it's supposed to. And that can be a bit of a tricky maneuver, especially with little kids, because they like to bite you. But we do sometimes have to do inner oral work, especially when you're trying to manipulate outside of the cranium. But the inner parts are not following suit because something is lodged in a way that it shouldn't be.
We're out of time. This has been an eye opener, KellyAnne. I had no idea that you ran so deep in the cranial area. I know that you support a lot of that in terms of what you do in your practice, but my gosh, this went super deep today in a really cool way of understanding what's going on within our heads. There's a lot to consider, and one thing is connected to another thing. You have one small injury, and that can impact many different things from within your head. Wow. Do I have this right? You have multiple locations?
So actually recently we did have to close a location due to my collaborative partner. She expanded and she ended up having to use the room. So if you need any infrared light therapy, Caroline Diller in Cumberland Valley Chiropractic now offers it. And that was my room. But no hard feelings. We have expanded in our Camp Hill location. So we are looking for another therapist to take on our multitudes of people that are coming in. But yes, we are still in practice, but our main location is now the Camp Hill location.
Wow. Thank you for today. And we can be seen anywhere on the planet. You are the cranial expert in my book in terms of all of this. My gosh. What's the best way for somebody to contact you?
Yeah, so the best way would be our online. You can message us through our website at kaclinicalmassage.com, or you can call us at 717-516-0959, or you can text that number as well. But if you do, just make sure you put your first and last name in there so we know who we're speaking with. Excellent.
KellyAnne, thank you for today. What an education this has been. And I appreciate it. I really do. This is we're delicate, more delicate than we probably give ourselves credit for. But
we sure are.
There's also people like you that can help support when we have those challenges. Thank you, and we'll talk soon, okay?
You're welcome. Take care, Mr. Steve.
You too. We'll be right back. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Let's go inside the mind of a 10-year-old.
I should have worn those earrings today. I like those earrings. Gabby has those awesome earrings. I need to ask her where she got those, but that's just what she would want me to do. I'll have Michaela ask her for me.
Buckle up, Sarah.
Yeah, but then Michaela will be like, why don't you just ask her yourself? That's just like Michaela.
Sarah, buckle up.
Michaela's such a great name. I wish I was called Michaela. There's like a dozen Sarahs in my class.
Hey, we're not hitting the road until you buckle up, honey.
Oh yeah, seatbelt. I forget sometimes because my brain is like busy, you know? I wonder if there's pizza at school today.
Sometimes it can be tough to get through to your kids, but it's not impossible. Always make sure they're wearing their seatbelts, even on short drives. Remember, you have the keys, you have the power. Never give up until they buckle up. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council. Visit safercar.gov/kidsbuckleup for more information.